Okay, it is 2 o'clock, so I think we're going to get started. Karen, are you ready? All right, so before we jump in, I'm just going to go over a little bit of logistics. My name is Amber Dahlstrom. I'm the Director of Special Services, and I will be the facilitator for today's session. Joining us as well is Karen Connor, who is Head of Operations. And then we also have a board member, Jeff Magnuson, who will be with us, and he will be helping kind of navigate the group chat for questions and then taking notes that on our discussions so that we can publish those later. Just a little bit of kind of meeting and Zoom protocols just to help make sure that we stay efficient and get to everybody today. The meeting is going to be recorded, and just for clarification and for sharing purposes. If you have any thoughts or questions that you'd like to share, please share through the group chat. That way we just have a nice record, and it kind of cuts down on people cutting in and out and talking on top of each other. Real quick, Karen, are you recording or am I? Yeah. Okay. Also, please make sure that your microphones are muted just to kind of cut down on that background noise as well so that everyone can hear. And then just remember that it is a larger group, and so when posing questions and ideas, try and, we ask that you maybe think more big picture, and if they're really detailed or technical, either save to the end or there is a hotline email as well. Also, before we get started, so we're going to be talking about our roadmap for this next year that was published, and that was developed by different task forces that included parents and different staff members. And so we tried to get a large perspective and a lot of different feedback and opinions on, what would work, what wouldn't work, and so forth. We also took guidance from MDH, MDE, OSHA, and the CDC as well, especially with the health and safety portion. All right, so welcome. Thank you for joining us today. I know sometimes it's hard in the summer to take time away from work and family, but we appreciate you joining us today to help give us some feedback and maybe raise any questions or things that we just hadn't thought of yet. So the purpose of this session, like I said, is really just to hear if there's anything in there from you guys that you feel is really unclear, or if there's things that we hadn't even thought of yet. We had published a few different, or pushed out a few different surveys along the way this summer, and we thank you if you had were able to participate in those. We use your feedback to help guide some of our learning models. So the first thing we'll do is start with the health and safety and the health and screening process, and then we'll move into curriculum, and then if there's time still, kind of a general brainstorming session as well. So just trying to think. Before I open it up to questions and to Karen to dive deeper on anything, just want to highlight that in the plan it talks about, but that way we're starting on the same page, is that all staff and students will be screened through a health screener before entering the bus and or school if they're dropped off. Oh, perfect. Positive comment on the chat box for the roadmap. So does anyone have any questions about the health screening, cleaning, kind of the operational piece?
Amber, I can talk a little bit, speak a little bit to how the screening is going to work. One question that we get fairly often is temperature going to be taken of every student that comes into the building? And temperature is not currently part of the screening protocol that we have. And working with the Minnesota Department of Health and the School Nurses Association, temperature is kind of a secondary symptom, and it's actually a symptom that you need in addition to another symptom. So if you look at the roadmap, the reopening, we have those health screening questions listed there. First question to be asked would be, have you had close contact with anybody who's either tested positive or been exposed to COVID-19? And then the other questions will follow. The two questions that we're finding are the most important are to have a new cough and shortness of breath. Those are standalone symptoms that could indicate that COVID is present. The other symptoms, you need 2 of those symptoms for an indication. We're very fortunate to have a good relationship with silent dismissal. Many of you might not know what silent dismissal is. It's a program that we use to dismiss our K-5 students every afternoon. And we were able to work with them to develop a health screening app that will be able to be used for all students and staff. And it's a really quick screen that you just run through really quickly. If you have 3 students at Eagle Ridge Academy, all 3 names will pop up so you can answer the questions quickly for all of them. And if you don't complete that screening by 7 o'clock, you'll get a push from a text saying, hey, just a reminder, complete that screening. That data that's collected from that screening app will go to Paula Kofflin, who's our school nurse, and she will be able to follow up if there's any concerns or questions about the information that was entered into that, that health screening app. It will also give you information if you say you have 2 out of the symptoms that are listed in that health screening app. It will give you direction to call Ms. Kofflin before coming into the building. And it also will give her information about who didn't complete that app or that health screening. So she'll be able to follow up with those families. It also will have an added feature of reporting attendance. So parents will no longer need to call the attendance line or email. They can report right on that app and let us know that their students that the student will be gone, and if it's due to COVID related symptoms or something completely different. Let's see.
Sharon, there is a question in the chat that maybe you could help us with. It says the roadmap the plan talked about and indicated that commonly touched items would be sanitized between uses. Can you kind of give us a little more details on the operations of that?
Yeah. So when we're talking about commonly touched items, we're talking about doorknobs, like the drinking fountains will be turned off, the bubbler portion will be turned off, but the bottle fill portion will be still on for staff and students to fill a water bottle. Tables that would be in a classroom would be a commonly touched item. So there's going to be a protocol. Some of it will be done by teachers within the classroom, that they'll have that sanitizer where they'll be sanitizing in between student contact with those items. And some of it will be done by our maintenance crew during the day. Probably most things out of the classroom will be taken care of by our maintenance crew. And then let's see. This is a question. I have a rather large, big, hairy, and perhaps stupid question. Do parents get to choose which of the 3 scenarios their children adhere to, or is ERA, picking an avenue based on what Governor Walz says today? I'm not sure how many of you have been watching the news. Some news is leaked out today. It looks like the school districts are going to have a little bit more flexibility in choosing the way they want to go. I can't assume why Governor Walz did it, but I would think that it's because what looks right for Minneapolis might not look right for Grand Rapids, Minnesota. And so he's giving a little bit of leeway to the superintendents. ERA will be offering a distance learning option for families who have a child who's medically fragile, or maybe just isn't comfortable with coming back to school with the precautions that we have in place. So and that will be an option if we go with in-person learning, or if we have a hybrid model that we're going to be following. That distance learning option will be available. If we opt for in-person learning, you can't opt for hybrid. That won't be a choice, but the distance learning would be a choice that you could choose, that you could go with. Let's see. I think I got yours, Becky. Let's see. Penny Teeter asked, how will you distinguish between regular run-of-the-mill viruses present in the fall versus COVID? You might have a headache and some aches, but not COVID. That's a question that's been commonly asked as well. That will screen for COVID, you know, and anything that presents like COVID, Ms. Kofflin will follow up on, and she's our school nurse. And so she will be in contact with anybody who has COVID symptoms or is presenting with COVID symptoms and help them plan next steps, whether that's, you know, a trip to the doctor to be tested for COVID or staying home. So that's something that Paula Kofflin will be working with families and staff that are presenting with symptoms that could be COVID, but also could be just a common cold. Are there any other questions regarding the safety precautions that we're taking or any of the health screening?
Are you actually going to do testing? Do you have test kits available?
We do not have test kits available. There's going to be some more information coming out from Minnesota Department of Health, and I can't speak to it because I don't have all of the information about how they would handle it if there was a positive case in a school, and it will be determined by how many positive cases, what the exposure looks like. But they're speaking to maybe some mobile testing units, but the school itself will not be testing. Question about transportation. Can you please explain more on measures while riding bus to and from the school? That's laid out in our roadmap to reopening, and there's also some information in that 2021 planning guide for all three scenarios that was written by our consultant. All students riding the bus will complete that health screening prior to getting on the bus. We will have infrared thermometers on the buses in case somebody presents with a symptom, and we want to check for a temp as well. All students will wear masks while they're on the buses. The drivers will be screened prior to starting their day. They will wear masks as well. Students will be required to sit in assigned seats, and buses will be filled from back to front, if that makes sense to you. So students who are picked up first, their assigned seats will be in the back. We'll try to keep families together in assigned seats, and that way it'll minimize students passing back and forth. We also are limiting our capacity on buses to 50 this year, so that's 2 to a seat. Normal capacity for a bus is 77. So there'll be fewer students on the bus, and masks have to be worn. We will have hand sanitizer too, so we're encouraging kids to sanitize their hands before they get on the bus and wash their hands upon arrival at school. Then the buses will be sanitized between each route. So currently our buses only run Eagle Ridge Academy routes. So no other schools will be riding our bus. The buses will be sanitized in between each run. So that's in between the AM run and the PM run, and then a deep cleaning overnight. And we have the sanitizing misters that you've probably seen in the news will be used on the buses as well as in the school.
I can take the next question. Will a sick child be allowed to switch to distance learning briefly and then switch back? And then there's a follow-up one talking about if they're waiting for a COVID test to come back. And so we are, that option is available to switch back. Ideally, the roadmap talks about having 2-day notice just for logistics on our end. If a student is, let's say we're in person and you've chosen in person for your child, to give us that time to make those adjustments and possibly reassign some staff or teachers and things like that. And so ideally we would ask for 2 days, but obviously some of that's just we're gonna see how it goes. And then transitioning back, we ask for 1 week to transition from distance learning to in-person. And again, that's just to help us make sure that everything is set and ready to go to ensure the best transition possible.
Okay, Kate had a question here. The roadmap had diagrams of desk setups with, I assume, plexiglass barriers. Will these barriers be cleaned between classes? The Academy has purchased plexiglass barriers, and what we purchased were personal portable plexiglass barriers. So for grades K through 5, they really sit just at their desk and they don't share desks with anybody else. So we envision that plexiglass barrier kind of staying on their desk all day. For our kids in grades 6 through 12, they do switch classrooms during the day. So these barriers actually, it's just a 3-sided barrier. It actually folds and has a carrying handle. So each student will be issued their own personal plexiglass barrier. This cuts down on the time it will take to sanitize a classroom in between classes, because the kids will fold up, take their own barrier with them. They're the only one touching it. They're the only one using it during the day. We felt like that was a safer option, and our consultants agreed with that. So those barriers will travel with our students in grades 6 through 12 throughout the day, and will be taken down prior to sanitizing the tables in the classroom. Let's see. Will we need to run more routes to accommodate max number of students per bus? Right now, we have very few routes that are at their limits. I think I only have 1 or 2 people on a wait list for routes. We've had a much lower response to transportation than we've had in years past. I do have an additional bus waiting as a backup. We contracted for an additional bus should we need to add to use that route, that additional route.
It looks like the next comment, just some feedback about, we are planning to have 2 different kind of 15-minute window drop-offs, and just wondering if that is enough time just on previous experience. So we will definitely add that in our feedback and to take a look, and in that, yes, we might be monitoring and adjusting a few of these things once we, if we are back and operational, and sometimes what looks good on paper, when you get actual bodies involved, doesn't always, timing needs to be adjusted. So we will definitely, be needing to kind of monitor and adjust those things.
In addition to that, we also have a planned debrief with our consultant for about 2 weeks, 2 or 3 weeks into the school year, so that we can look at what's working, what's not working, what's changed in the world of COVID that we might need to update in our plan, and what can we do better. So this isn't a one and done attempt at these plans. It's going to be a living document. We've seen how much it's changed. Everything's changed since June, and we expect to have to be flexible and pivot with the changes that are coming.
Part of Becky's question and feedback was the expectation that students are not in the building before 7:30 or after 3:30. How will we enforce? So yep, the roadmap talks about before students would be able to be dropped off early and wait in the vestibule, and that this year, just with everything and social distancing, will not be an option. And so I don't know if Karen, you have any more feedback on that, but that's just something that we're not allowed to accommodate this year.
Right. So and kids would wait in the vestibule prior to 7:30, and that's just not a safe plan for this year. There's just not enough space to allow for that, for students to congregate safely. And with after school as well, unless there is an activity that they are actively engaged in, they won't be able to be in the building after 3:30.
My question was more about how are we going to make sure that happens?
That actually will be a plan that's worked out with the principals. They're the ones that enforce that. So they'll work together with the assistant principals and come up with a plan for probably clearing the building in the afternoon, and what do we do, if there's students that are left in the building.
Karen, are the 6-12 barriers, are those going home with the students?
No.
Are they responsible for?
Yeah, the students won't be responsible for taking them home to clean. The building is going to be sanitized every night. We have a regular mister, which actually looks kind of like it's basically a modified paint gun, like that companies have created to spray sanitizer. We also have purchased an electrostatic mister, which it's actually pretty cool. So if you spray it at an object like a doorknob or something that's three-dimensional, it wraps the sanitizer around the object. So those will stay at school and be sanitized at school.
All right, it looks like the next couple questions are more on kind of the different plans and curriculum. Does anyone have any questions or any more questions as far as the operations and the cleaning and things like that? And otherwise we can transition into more of the different learning models and curriculum.
Will the upper grade students be able to use their lockers, or will they have to carry all their stuff around?
They will be able to use their lockers. We're going to ask that they limit the items they're bringing into the lockers, because we'll want to sanitize the lockers as well. So that probably means no cute little shelves and mirrors and things hanging in your lockers, because we don't want so many different surfaces that need to be sanitized. And the recommendation from the consultants is that if a book bag or a backpack comes from home, it goes inside the locker, because that book bag was in somebody else's home. We don't want that mixing with the other students during the day. And so the principals and the assistant principals are coming up with a schedule. So passing time will probably look a little bit differently, might be staggered to eliminate some of that mixing of students at the lockers, but we're still working out those details.
I just have one more question about people in the building, not students, but volunteers. So the roadmap indicated that only essential people would be allowed in the building. Excuse me. Would volunteers be considered essential? I don't know.
Most likely not. I mean, we're looking at students and staff. The visitors to the building are going to be very limited.
Okay.
Okay, I can take the next question here. When will we know what option has been chosen? So as I think Karen mentioned earlier, the governor is doing his address right now and sharing the guidelines from the state. So once those guidelines are published, then we will sit down as a school and really dive into that new guidance. And our goal is to come to a decision as soon as possible. Just one, we need to plan, and we know that families need to plan as well. I don't have a hard date to give at this time, but know that we will be working on reviewing all the new guidance that comes out or is coming out right now, and then working on coming up with what route ERA, based off whatever guidelines is given, what route we're going to go with. How many students will be in the building on a given day, week? So I think this one is getting in like A or B days with the hybrid. And so the three different models that we talk about in the plan is the distance learning, and that is a combination of synchronous and asynchronous instruction. So synchronous being live instruction with a teacher, possibly via Zoom. We are going with, some of the feedback that we got from the different surveys was having just one platform. And so we are looking at Canvas right now, which is a learning management system to provide just one platform for teachers and families to use with digital learning. We also have the hybrid. Right now, the plan for ERA is in every other week, Monday through Thursday. This allows just kind of natural quarantining, and then Fridays everyone is distance learning, and this just allows extra time for a deep sanitation of the building and materials, and to help exchange the air over, and just really allow us time to make sure that we have the amount of time necessary to really sanitize in between the two groups of students that will be alternating kind of an every other week system. And then the capacity for hybrid is 50% of the student or not just student and Karen,
50% of the population It's 50% of the capacity of the building, but
Thank
you
you.
have to have the ability to socially, or we call it physically, distance of 6 feet. So our classrooms obviously have a higher, for our K-5 classrooms, we have 23 students in a classroom. The capacity of that classroom is obviously higher than 23 students. So you're looking at but we would we would divide the enrollment in half at that point. We do have a number of families who've indicated that they do want distance learning. So my gut is that it would probably be less than 50% in a hybrid, just with the families that have made that indication for distance learning. If book bags have to stay in lockers and passing time is potentially limited, I'm sorry, I lost the question now.
How do students carry what they need between classes?
We aren't necessarily, right now there's a 5-minute passing time between our upper school classes, which is pretty long passing time. There's quite a bit of time for socializing in there too. What we're kind of envisioning is staggering it, not necessarily shortening it for the students, but staggering it so that we can schedule students in the hallway at different times. The teachers will probably be brought in, some of the teachers, to advise on this as well, because they know best what the students are carrying back and forth to their classrooms, and the assistant principals have a pretty good handle on what happens during passing time. So they'll be assisting in making those plans.
The next question is around the hybrid option and just the flow of instruction. And that is something right now that the building principals and assistant principals and the task force are working on. I don't have any truly set, this is what we're doing right now. We're still researching the different options and learning from schools that have already started and have done different scenarios. And so that is something that we're still in the process of working through, is the flow of that instruction if students are on an every other week in-person and distance learning scenario. Another question is, in a hybrid scenario, are families grouped together, or is it possible that kids in the same family might be in different groups? That is something that we are very aware of. And no, we are looking at trying to make sure that we are grouping students from the same family together so that they are running on the same cycle.
Can I ask a question, just clarifying about the hybrid thing? So when I read the roadmap, I thought I understood that families would choose either distance learning or in-person learning, and then the hybrid would only come into play if the school needed to split the group of kids that are doing in-person learning in order to manage the physical distancing. Is that correct? Or are we saying if you're in person, you're every other week?
No, you were correct. So if our first option that we want to do, if is an option, is in person. And then, depending on what the guidance is, would be next having to go to hybrid to reduce, to be able to physical distance and reduce the capacity. And that would be then a rotating schedule of in-person and distance learning, just to accommodate that need to reduce capacity within the building.
And the distance learning option will be available for parents or families to choose whether we're in person or hybrid. So if they feel that they need distance learning.
Can we switch between distance learning and hybrid in the middle of the school year? Yes, so in person or hybrid, we would go to hybrid if we needed to, like we said, just to physical distancing. But if a student, if a family was to choose distance learning, because as Karen said, that is an option all year, no matter if we are in person, then you can switch between distance learning and in person, whether that's we're currently in full in person or if we're running in a hybrid. So that's addressed in the plan that, and again, we talked about at the beginning was, ideally we would like 2-day notice to switch from either that in person or if we're running a hybrid model to distance learning. And then if you're in distance learning and you would like to switch to in person, we ask for a week's notice. And again, just logistically to make sure that we have the smoothest transition possible. Next question is, if there are a higher number of high school families choosing distance learning, could some students choose to do in-person learning both weeks A and B, this being a possibility as there are not a lot of students in the high school? I don't have an answer for that, but that's definitely something for me to take back to the task force and to look into. And a lot of this too is a numbers game, is how many students are choosing distance learning, and that impacts too then how many students, let's say if we had to go to the hybrid model, we can have and still be under that 50% capacity. So that's yeah, that's not something that we had talked about, so I will definitely make sure to bring that back. Are there any circumstances that would cause ERA to move to all distance learning if Minnesota has a major surge, for example?
Yes, I can speak to that. We might go to distance learning, but it would be a conversation that our school nurse would have with the Minnesota Department of Health. So we would be basing those decisions based on recommendations from the Minnesota Department of Health, whether it's an outbreak in the school or in the area. And so that's one reason that the governor had asked us to plan for all 3 scenarios, is that we need to be able to pivot between those scenarios throughout the year with 1-day notice. So it is possible that we could end up doing all distance learning at some point.
Next question in the chat is, will band still be offered as an elective? And if so, what adjustments would be made if hybrid or full distance learning is selected to allow students to participate?
Band is still offered as an elective. Those teachers aren't back yet, so I can't really speak to what the adjustments are going to be made. Those granular decisions will be made, following the guidelines in our 2021 planning scenario, and the principals and the teachers will work together to see how that works.
All right, next question in the chat is the task force still accepting idea suggestions? If so, what's the best way to reach out to them? So there is an email address set up, and that is, if you have the roadmap, it's on the cover. Otherwise, I will type it into the chat here the next time Karen is answering a question.
Will ERA be required to report to MDE or MDH how many students are choosing distance learning? We don't really know that yet. So I'm sure there'll be some guidelines around what we do once we choose our scenario. I'm sure Minnesota Department of Health and Minnesota Department of Education will know what we're choosing, but we don't have that information yet. Will there be after-school care offered this year? Yes, and it will be it will follow kind of the same guidelines as and restrictions based on what model we are in. So if we're all in person, there'll definitely be less restrictions and guidelines. And if we're a hybrid, we'll need to follow those same restrictions and guidelines as we would for the regular school day.
question is, if a hybrid model is selected, is it possible to request children from different households to be put into the same group? Yes, so we are, again, we're looking at, we're trying to be very, very aware of the different families and family members being across multiple schools. And so that is something that we've already had discussions about, is if we go to hybrid, is trying to make sure to really coordinate so that those same siblings or same household members are in the same rotation. All right, I am out of questions in the chat box. Does anyone have any further questions or feedback or ideas or anything that we haven't thought of? Oh, well, thank you guys for, oops, sorry.
Sorry. Oh,
How to indicate your preference for hybrid or distance, or I guess in person or distance?
You will be receiving a form shortly. Can't remember if it's going out tomorrow or Monday, but the form's already been created for you to indicate your interest in distance learning. If you're not choosing distance, we assume that you're choosing whatever model we go with. And so that actually is going to help us make decisions too, gathering that information.
Besides synchronous learning, can you elaborate on any of the discussions or ideas around ensuring that what we're offering is a true classical education? Because synchronous learning is really the only thing I saw mentioned that addressed that concern from parents that was talked about based on the spring distance learning.
You know, it is something that we are aware of and have had conversations around wanting to make sure that we stick true to being classical. It is a little difficult without teachers back in the building to really come up with kind of the how we're going to make that happen, but it is a priority of ours.
Question, in the hybrid, group A is distance learning when group B is in school? That is correct.
The other question in the chat is the COVID-19 email better than the fall 2020 TF for task force email? Either one is fine. Both are being checked. Okay. Well, thank you guys. Well, can maybe last call. Does anyone have any last questions before we adjourn? And again, don't be afraid to reach out. Either one of the email options is great. And we are going to work so we've had several of these sessions with kind of breaking apart, like this one is the 912, and we've had ones with the other schools as well. And we are going to start compiling this information and the questions and the feedback, and then put something out so that way everyone has an opportunity to look at maybe the questions that other groups or things that came up in the other groups that you may read and go, oh, I didn't even think of that. That's super helpful or good to know. So we are gonna, and that was one of the reasons for recording, is we are gonna publish some information from these as well. So again, thank you so much for joining us today and your questions and your feedback, and enjoy the rest of the sunny day.
Yeah, and I just wanted to put a thank you out there for all of the people who participated in the task force groups. We had lots of parents, lots of teachers, some of the leadership team, and everybody put in a lot of hours putting this together, and we're so thankful for the different perspectives that everybody brought to this planning.
I want to second that. This is clearly a lot of work and in a very short amount of time with limited information from the state. So thank you guys for everything.
And I want to third that because we have a lot of different kids going to different schools in our neighborhood, and you guys are so incredibly far ahead of everybody else. And I know that that's because you're on top of it. And I just want to say how much you are appreciated. So thank you so very much.
That's an awesome way to end this.
Yeah.
The end.